Picture this a serene medieval garden, bursting with vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed hedges. To the untrained eye, it's a peaceful retreat, a place of beauty and tranquility. But look closer, and you'll discover something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. These gardens were often the front lines of a hidden war, where every tool, every plant, and every stone could be a weapon in disguise. The gardeners who tended these spaces weren't just cultivating roses and herbs, they were masters of deception, wielding obscure tools designed for surveillance, sabotage, and even assassination. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's best-kept secrets, the covert world of castle gardeners and the 26 ingenious tools they used to outwit their enemies. Think about the stakes. In a time when castles were fortresses of power, intelligence was everything. A single piece of information could mean the difference between victory and defeat, life and death. And who better to gather that intelligence than the humble gardener, unassuming, always present, and with perfect access to every corner of the grounds. They carried tools that looked ordinary: pruning shears, watering cans, trowels, but hidden within them were mechanisms for spying, signaling, or even poisoning. Some devices were designed to look like harmless garden ornaments, while others could be quickly dismantled into deadly weapons. The line between tending to plants and executing a covert operation was thinner than you'd ever imagine. What's truly astonishing is the level of creativity and craftsmanship that went into these tools. We're not just talking about simple hidden blades or secret compartments. These were elaborate contraptions engineered with the precision of a master blacksmith and the cunning of a seasoned spy. A watering jug might double as a listening device, its hollow base amplifying whispers from nearby conversations. A seemingly innocent rake could conceal a blade for cutting ropes or sabotaging enemy equipment. And some tools were so cleverly disguised that even modern historians struggle to identify their true purpose. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover these remarkable artifacts one by one, revealing how they were used, who wielded them, and the dramatic impact they had on medieval warfare. So settle in, because by the end of this journey, you'll never look at a garden the same way again. In the Middle Ages, a castle's garden was far more than just a picturesque escape. It was a carefully calculated extension of the fortress itself. Imagine walking through rows of fragrant herbs and blooming flowers, unaware that every path, every hedge, even the placement of certain plants, was designed to serve a hidden purpose. These gardens weren't merely decorative. They were tactical landscapes where beauty and danger grew side by side. Lords and nobles understood that an enemy might breach walls or scale towers, but few would suspect a quiet garden of concealing traps or spies. That's why the gardeners who tended these spaces held such a unique position. They weren't just horticulturists, they were trusted confidants, often privy to secrets that even some knights or servants never learned. The duality of their role was extraordinary. On one hand, they needed an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, which herbs could heal or harm, which flowers bloomed at strategic times to signal allies, which vines could be woven into ropes or barriers. On the other, they had to master the art of deception, crafting tools and layouts that appeared innocent while serving a darker function. A rose trellis might hide a hollow compartment for passing messages. A decorative sundial could double as a cipher wheel to decode intercepted orders. Even the simple act of pruning a hedge wasn't always about aesthetics. It could be a way to clear sightlines for archers or obscure escape routes from prying eyes. This blend of botany and subterfuge made gardens the perfect cover. nature's inherent unpredictability. The way vines sprawled or bushes grew unevenly provided a natural camouflage for man-made tricks. A loose stone in a garden wall might conceal a spy's listening post. A seemingly wild thicket could hide a pitfall trap, and because gardens were spaces of leisure, they attracted visitors, giving gardeners the perfect excuse to linger, observe, and report. It's no wonder that historical accounts describe castle gardeners as some of the most well-informed individuals in a lord's employ. They moved unnoticed, their true purpose disguised by dirt-stained hands and baskets of clippings. Understanding this context is key to appreciating why these obscure tools existed. They weren't just whimsical inventions. They were solutions to real problems in a world where trust was scarce and danger lurked in every shadow. The next time you stroll through a garden, take a moment to look closer. What appears to be a simple rake or watering can might have once been part of a silent, deadly game, one where the stakes were life and death, and the gardeners were the unseen players. Castle gardeners walked a razor's edge between two worlds, one of sunlight and soil, the other of shadows and secrets. While their hands pruned roses or planted herbs, their eyes mapped every inch of the castle's defenses, noting which gates creaked, which walls had loose stones, and which hidden passages lay behind ivy-covered entrances. This wasn't just observation, it was reconnaissance. A gardener's daily routine gave them unparalleled access to spaces even guards couldn't patrol unnoticed. They'd linger near barracks to overhear troop movements, or casually tend to hedges along the outer walls, memorizing weak points in the fortress's defenses. Their knowledge made them invaluable, not just as caretakers of the land, but as living blueprints of the castle's vulnerabilities. But their role went beyond mere intelligence gathering. In times of siege, gardeners transformed into active participants in the castle's survival. Some were taught to wield scythes or pruning knives as weapons, turning humble gardening tools into last-ditch arms against invaders. Others learned to encode messages in the arrangement of flower beds or herb gardens, using blooms like lavender or rosemary as living ciphers. A sudden shift in the pattern of marigolds might signal an approaching enemy, while a specific knot in the vines along a wall could mark the location of a hidden supply cache. These weren't random acts of gardening, they were deliberate, calculated strategies woven into the fabric of everyday labor. The most trusted gardeners even played roles in castle security. They might hollow out sections of tree trunks to stash emergency weapons or poison-tipped thorns among rose bushes to deter trespassers. Their work required a chilling creativity. A trowel's edge could be sharpened to cut through rope or leather straps, while a watering can spout might conceal a blowpipe for delivering silent, ranged attacks. What's remarkable is how seamlessly these dual purposes coexisted. A gardener could spend the morning grafting fruit trees and the afternoon sabotaging an enemy's saddle with a blade hidden in their pruning shears. Their reputation as harmless laborers was their greatest weapon, allowing them to operate in plain sight. This duality extended to their relationships within the castle hierarchy. While nobles and knights openly wielded power, gardeners moved through the same spaces with quiet authority, privy to secrets that could topple regimes. They knew which herbs could heal a lord's indigestion or which could mimic the symptoms of poison. They understood the castle's rhythms, when guards changed shifts, when messengers arrived, when the wine cellar was left unguarded. In an era where information was as deadly as any sword, their role as both nurturer and saboteur made them indispensable. To underestimate a medieval gardener wasn't just a mistake, it could be a fatal one. Their tools, their knowledge, and their unassuming presence made them the unseen architects of survival in a world where every garden wall might hide a blade, and every bouquet could carry a coded warning. The Thorn Trowel was the perfect embodiment of a castle gardener's dual life, a tool that could nurture or kill with equal ease. On the surface, it looked utterly ordinary: a worn wooden handle, a curved metal blade for digging, and a few decorative thorns along its edge to deter pests. But in the hands of a trained gardener, it became something far deadlier. A subtle twist of the wrist could release a slender, razor-sharp blade hidden within the handle, transforming a mundane gardening implement into a weapon capable of slashing through ropes, leather straps, or even an enemy's throat. The thorns weren't just for show either. Each one had been meticulously filed to a needle's point, allowing them to puncture water skins, saddlebags, or the thin gaps in an opponent's armor with terrifying precision. What made the Thorn Trowel so effective was its sheer, unremarkable appearance. During castle inspections or enemy searches, it would be dismissed as just another gardening tool, tossed aside without a second glance. But in the right moment, it could mean the difference between life and death. Imagine a gardener kneeling in the dirt, seemingly focused on planting herbs, while secretly using the trowel's blade to sever the straps holding a rival knight's saddle in place. Hours later, that knight might find himself thrown from his horse mid-battle, never suspecting the humble gardener who'd passed him in the courtyard earlier that day. Or picture a siege where the castle's defenders relied on ropes to hoist supplies over the walls, only for those ropes to mysteriously fray and snap after a gardener accidentally brushed against them with their trowel's thorned edge. The genius of its design lay in its versatility. Unlike a sword or dagger which screamed danger, the Thorn Trowel was a weapon of opportunity. It didn't require a dramatic reveal. It could be drawn and used in the span of a heartbeat, then just as quickly returned to its harmless guise. Even if a gardener was caught with it, they could plausibly claim ignorance after all. Who would suspect a tool meant for tending flowers? Historical accounts suggest some versions even had hollow handles to store poison, turning a simple scrape into a delayed death sentence. This wasn't just a tool, it was a masterpiece of medieval deception, proof that in the shadows of castle gardens, even the most innocent objects could be weapons in disguise. Yet the Thorn Trowel's true power wasn't just in its hidden blade or sharpened thorns, it was in the psychological advantage it gave its wielder. A gardener armed with this tool didn't just have a means of defense, they had the element of absolute surprise. While knights trained for open combat and spies relied on stealth, the gardener could strike from a position of perceived weakness, exploiting the universal assumption that their work was harmless. It's a reminder that in the medieval world, danger didn't always come from the obvious threats. Sometimes it grew quietly among the roses, waiting for the right moment to strike. Watering cans were the ultimate Trojan horses of medieval castle gardens, seemingly innocent, utterly mundane, but hiding deadly secrets in plain sight. The hollowed-out watering can took this deception to another level. At first glance, it was just another tool for tending plants, its copper or tin surface dulled by use, its handle worn smooth from years of carrying. But beneath its ordinary exterior lay a meticulously engineered compartment, accessible only by twisting the base in a specific sequence. This hidden cavity could hold tightly rolled parchments, lockpicks, or even slender daggers, all shielded from prying eyes by the rhythmic slosh of water above. What made this design so brilliant was its adaptability. The spout wasn't just for pouring, it could be unscrewed to reveal a sharpened blade or a hooked tool for manipulating locks. Imagine a gardener casually moving through a crowded courtyard, the steady trickle of water from there masking the faint click of a mechanism as they discreetly passed a message to an ally. Or picture them kneeling to water a noble's prized roses, using the distraction to retrieve a hidden weapon or tool without ever breaking rhythm. The sound of water wasn't just camouflage, it was psychological misdirection. Guards grew so accustomed to the repetitive noise that they'd tune it out, never suspecting the quiet clink of metal or rustle of parchment beneath. Historical records suggest some versions even had weighted bottoms to ensure the can always tilted correctly, preventing accidental spills that might expose their secrets. Others featured spouts designed to funnel liquid in a way that muffled the sound of concealed objects. This wasn't just a container, it was a feat of medieval engineering, blending practicality with subterfuge. A gardener could water the same patch of earth for an hour, subtly eavesdropping on nearby conversations while their hands stayed busy, their true purpose disguised by the simple, repetitive motion of their work. Yet the hollowed-out watering can's greatest strength was its universality. Every castle had them, every garden needed them. They were so commonplace that even the most paranoid sentry wouldn't think to inspect one. In a world where spies might be caught with coded letters or hidden blades, the gardener's tool offered the perfect alibi. After all, who would interrogate someone over a can full of water? This unassuming object became a lifeline during sieges, smuggling food or medicine past enemy lines, or a silent weapon in times of betrayal. It's a testament to the ingenuity of castle gardeners where others saw a simple vessel. They saw infinite possibilities, proving once again that in their hands, even the most ordinary tools could become instruments of survival. Poison-tipped pruning shears were the medieval equivalent of a silent assassin tool so ordinary that no one would think twice about them, yet capable of delivering death with a single, casual touch. To the untrained eye, they looked like any other gardening implement, sturdy metal blades, a simple hinge, and handles worn smooth from years of use. But hidden along the inner edges were shallow grooves, meticulously carved to hold a thin film of poison. A gardener could dip the blades into a toxic paste derived from local plants monkshood for paralysis, belladonna for delirium, or hemlock for a slow, agonizing end, then go about their work as though nothing were amiss. One deliberate nick while trimming a vine and an enemy might collapse hours later, their symptoms dismissed as illness rather than sabotage. The brilliance of this design lay in its plausible deniability. Unlike a dagger or arrow which left obvious wounds, the shear's poison worked invisibly. A guard might feel a slight sting while passing a gardener pruning rose bushes, only to succumb to fever by nightfall. Even if suspicion arose, the poison's botanical origins made it nearly impossible to trace. After all, why would anyone interrogate a humble gardener about plants growing freely in the castle's own herb garden? The shears also allowed for terrifying versatility. A gardener could poison food by clipping herbs with contaminated blades, weaken enemy livestock by trimming fodder, or even sabotage weaponry by subtly fraying bowstrings with toxin-laced cuts. Every snip of the shears held lethal potential, masked by the rhythmic, innocent sound of gardening. Historical accounts suggest some versions had hollow handles, allowing gardeners to carry multiple poisons or antidotes. A twist of the wrist could switch the blade's groove from a paralytic to a deadly strain, depending on the target. Others featured self-cleaning mechanisms. A quick rinse in a water trough would erase all evidence, leaving just a damp, harmless tool. But perhaps the most chilling detail was how seamlessly this weapon fit into daily life. While knights trained openly for combat, the gardeners' training was their reputation. No one expected the person dead-heading flowers to also be selecting which noble might dine on poisoned rosemary that evening. What's striking is how these shears exploited the medieval world's reliance on plants for both medicine and malice. The same knowledge that let gardeners heal with herbal poultices also allowed them to kill without a trace. A castle's healers might use yarrow to staunch bleeding, while its gardeners used yarrow's toxic cousin to open invisible wounds. This duality made the pruning shears more than just tools. They were symbols of a gardener's unspoken power. In a society where strength was often measured by the sword, the quiet snick of these blades proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapons were the ones no one thought to fear. Gravel-paved signaling paths turned the simple act of walking into an invisible alarm system, one that invaders never saw coming. These weren't just decorative garden trails, they were acoustic traps, each stone carefully selected and placed to produce a precise crunch underfoot. Gardeners would sort pebbles by size, arranging them in alternating layers to create distinct sound signatures. A stranger's heavy boots would trigger a deep, uneven rattle, while the lighter, rhythmic steps of a patrolling guard sounded almost melodic in comparison. The difference was subtle, but to a trained ear, it was as clear as a shouted warning. The genius of these paths lay in their psychological deception. Intruders assumed the crunch of gravel beneath their feet was nothing more than an unavoidable nuisance, never suspecting that each step was broadcasting their presence to hidden sentries. Meanwhile, castle defenders developed an intimate familiarity with the sounds of their own grounds. A deviation from the norm, a hesitant gait, an unfamiliar cadence would send guards into high alert long before an intruder reached the inner walls. Some historical accounts describe paths near vital entry points deliberately lined with jagged flint, ensuring footsteps echoed sharply enough to carry through open windows or arrow slits. Maintenance was key. Gardeners would rake these paths daily, not just for aesthetics, but to keep the gravel loose and acoustically responsive. Over time, they'd even adjust the composition, adding finer stones to mute the sound of ally movements or coarser ones to amplify potential threats. In siege preparations, some castles reportedly scattered extra gravel near vulnerable gates, creating a makeshift perimeter alarm. The system was so refined that certain paths could indicate the direction of movement, a leftward lean in the gravel's pitch suggesting someone veering toward the armory, or a sudden skid of stones hinting at a sprint toward the barracks. What's fascinating is how these paths blurred the line between nature and technology. Unlike metal tripwires or mechanical bells, gravel alarms left no trace of their purpose. Even if an invader grew suspicious, there was nothing to dismantle, just ordinary stones underfoot. And because gardens were spaces of leisure, these sonic defenses escaped the scrutiny given to walls or gates. A spy might study guard rotations or sketch fortifications, but who would think to document the sound of a walkway? It's a testament to medieval ingenuity. Where others saw a simple garden feature, castle defenders had crafted an early warning system that was silent to enemies but deafening to those who knew how to listen. The legacy of these paths lingers in modern security design. Today's pressure-sensitive floors and vibration detectors owe a conceptual debt to those medieval gardeners who first weaponized the sound of footsteps. But there's a haunting elegance to the original, a system that required no electricity, no blueprints, just an intimate knowledge of the land and the patience to let the stones speak. In a world of clashing swords and towering fortifications, sometimes the quietest tools were the most revolutionary. Herb-infused smoke pots were the medieval equivalent of a magician's vanishing act, ornamental clay planters that could transform a tranquil garden into a smokescreen of chaos in seconds. To the casual observer, they appeared to be nothing more than decorative containers, perhaps holding a fragrant rosemary bush or a cluster of lavender. But beneath the soil and roots lay a carefully packed layer of dried herbs, each selected for its potent effect when burned. Some blends produced thick, disorienting smoke laced with poppy or mandrake to dull the senses, while others released acrid clouds of wolfsbane or crushed nettles, sending attackers into fits of coughing and blurred vision. The true genius of these pots was their dual purpose. Their floral scent masked the smoke's sinister properties, making it seem like just another waft of garden perfume until it was too late. Placement was everything. Gardeners positioned these pots near choke points, gate entrances, barracks doorways, or along narrow garden paths where fleeing defenders could vanish into the haze. In moments of crisis, a single torch thrust into the soil could ignite the hidden payload, creating instant cover for a retreat or sowing confusion among invaders. Historical accounts describe sieges where entire assault parties stumbled blindly through these herbal fog banks, their weapons slipping from numbed fingers as the castle's defenders melted into the mist. The pot's unassuming design made them perfect for deception. Unlike braziers or signal fires, which drew immediate suspicion, these planters were ignored until activated. Some even had false bottoms to keep the combustible layer dry during rain, ensuring they'd remain functional in any weather. What's chilling is how these devices exploited the medieval reliance on gardens for healing. The same herbs used to soothe headaches or aid sleep, lavender, chamomile, valerian, could be weaponized in higher concentrations, turning a place of respite into a tactical battleground. A gardener tending their medicinal plants might secretly be fortifying their smoke pots with extra cuttings, all while nodding politely to passing nobles. The pots also served as early chemical warfare. Some blends included irritants like mustard seed or horseradish root, creating smoke so potent it could blister skin or temporarily blind anyone caught in its path. Yet because the ingredients were all botanically sourced, the smoke left no trace of foul play, just a lingering herbal scent and a courtyard full of groggy, bewildered enemies. The legacy of these smoke pots reveals a brutal truth about medieval warfare. Innovation thrived in the most unexpected places. While knights honed their swords and engineers built catapults, it was the gardeners, with their intimate knowledge of plants and unassuming tools, who crafted some of the era's most psychologically devastating weapons. Their creations proved that sometimes the quietest hands held the power to turn the tide of battle, one deceptively fragrant puff of smoke at a time. Trellis' climbing spikes turned garden ornaments into silent sentinels, beautiful by day, deadly by night. These weren't the obvious fortifications of iron bars or spiked palisades. They were masterpieces of deception, woven into the very fabric of the garden's aesthetics. Picture a lush ivy-covered trellis, its delicate latticework climbing the castle walls, adorned with blooming roses. To the casual observer, it was just another touch of natural beauty. But hidden within those wooden or metal frames were slender, needle-sharp spikes, retractable and perfectly camouflaged among the foliage. With a simple twist of a concealed mechanism, a gardener could deploy them in seconds, transforming a decorative feature into a vertical minefield. The spacing of these spikes was a brutal work of art. Too close together and they'd be easily spotted, too far apart and they'd fail to stop a determined climber. Instead, they were arranged just enough to inflict maximum damage, piercing hands, shredding boots, or impaling thighs as intruders scrambled upward. Some designs even angled the spikes downward, ensuring that anyone attempting to dislodge them would only drive them deeper into their own flesh. And because the trellises were part of the garden's natural landscape, attackers rarely suspected them until it was too late. Imagine an assassin scaling a moonlit wall, fingers gripping what they thought was harmless vine-covered wood, only to recoil as hidden barbs sank into their palms. The more they struggled, the more the spikes tore at them, leaving a trail of blood as silent as the gardener who'd activated the trap hours before. Maintenance was ingeniously simple. Unlike moats or drawbridges, which required constant upkeep, these spikes needed only occasional lubrication to keep their mechanisms smooth. Gardeners would discreetly apply animal fat or beeswax during routine trellis inspections, ensuring the spikes could deploy without a sound. Some historical records suggest that certain castles even planted thorny roses or nettles at the base of these trellises, adding another layer of natural deterrence. The message was clear: every inch of the castle's exterior, even its most beautiful corners, was hostile territory for those who didn't belong. What's chilling is how these devices exploited the psychology of invasion. Climbers expected resistance from guards or battlements, not from the garden itself. By the time they realized their mistake, the damage was done. Torn gloves, punctured muscles, and the inevitable faltering grip that sent them tumbling backward. And because the spikes could be retracted at dawn, the morning sun would reveal nothing but an ordinary trellis, its blooms undisturbed, its secret intact. In a world where warfare often favored brute strength, these quiet, cunning defenses proved that sometimes the most effective weapons were the ones nobody saw coming until they were already bleeding. The legacy of trellis climbing spikes is a reminder that medieval security was as much about deception as it was about force. While archers manned the towers and knights guarded the gates, it was the gardeners who ensured that even the castle's beauty could bite back. Their work blurred the line between art and armor, leaving invaders to learn the hard way. In a fortress where even the roses had teeth, nowhere was safe. Birdhouses in medieval castle gardens were far more than charming decorations. They were covert listening posts, expertly designed to blend into the landscape while harvesting secrets. To the untrained eye, these structures served a single purpose: attracting songbirds to add life and melody to the grounds. But hidden beneath their quaint exteriors lay hollow chambers, meticulously engineered to amplify sound. A gardener tending to nearby flower beds could lean casually toward a birdhouse, appearing to admire the nesting wrens while actually eavesdropping on whispered conversations drifting across the courtyard. The curved interiors acted like natural sound mirrors, capturing snippets of dialogue about troop movements, supply shortages, or even assassination plots, all under the innocent guise of avian hospitality. The craftsmanship behind these listening posts was astonishing. Some featured narrow tubes funneling sound downward, allowing a gardener to press their ear against the base as if adjusting its position. Others had discreet peepholes carved into decorative carvings, offering a sliver of visibility to monitor who entered or exited key buildings. The presence of actual birds provided the perfect cover. The rustling of wings and chirping masked faint clicks when opening hidden compartments, while droppings and stray feathers made the structures seem untouched by human hands. Historical records suggest certain designs even included rotating panels, letting gardeners stash scrolls or lockpicks inside without leaving visible seams. Placement was a strategic art. Birdhouses were positioned near high-traffic areas along pathways to the armory, adjacent to the barracks, or overlooking the kitchen entrance where servants gossiped freely. Their height played a crucial role too. Mounted just above eye level, they forced passers-by to tilt their heads upward when speaking, projecting their voices directly into the sound-collecting chambers. A gardener might spend hours pruning a rosebush beneath one, patiently waiting for a careless noble to divulge sensitive information, confident that only sparrows were listening. What's remarkable is how these devices exploited the era's love of nature. Birds symbolized purity and peace, making their houses the last place anyone would suspect of harboring espionage. Even during castle inspections, no guard would dismantle a nest to check for secrets, not when doing so might anger superstitious lords who believed birds brought good fortune. This psychological blind spot gave gardeners unparalleled access to intelligence. A single birdhouse could overhear a treasonous plot at dawn, and by noon deliver a coded warning tucked into its false bottom, all while its feathered occupants sang obliviously overhead. The legacy of these avian spy posts reveals a profound truth about medieval surveillance. The most effective tools weren't just hidden, they were invited into daily life. While spies might be frisked at gates and messengers intercepted on roads, nobody questioned the quiet gardener refilling a bird feeder or the swallows darting in and out of their little wooden houses. In a world where trust was scarce, sometimes the best way to listen was to let nature do the talking. Flowerbed caltrops were the medieval equivalent of invisible landmines, tiny, brutal, and utterly disguised among nature's beauty. Picture a lush garden border near a castle-side gate, its soil dotted with delicate blooms and what appear to be scattered thorns or fallen twigs. But hidden in plain sight were dozens of star-shaped metal spikes, each no larger than a coin, their sharpened points angled upward to stab through leather boots or bare feet with ruthless efficiency. Unlike bulky traps that required manual triggering, these caltrops were always armed, lying dormant until an unwary step turned them into instruments of agony. The design was fiendishly simple. No matter how a caltrop landed when tossed, one spike always faced upward, guaranteeing it would bite into flesh. Gardeners could scatter them along pathways or beneath windows in seconds, then retrieve them just as quickly by dragging a magnetized rake through the soil. Their small size made them nearly undetectable, especially when dusted with dirt or nestled among real thorns. Historical accounts describe invaders limping away from castle grounds, bewildered by the sudden pain in their feet, never suspecting the vibrant flower beds they'd brushed past were the source. Some caltrops were even coated in rust or animal waste to ensure wounds festered, turning a minor puncture into a debilitating infection. What made these devices so effective was their psychological impact. Unlike a wall or moat which announced its danger openly, flowerbed caltrops shattered the illusion of safety. An intruder might dodge archers, evade guards, and pick every lock, only to be undone by a single misstep in what they assumed was harmless terrain. The pain wasn't just physical, it seeded paranoia. After the first victim yelped in surprise, every shadowy patch of earth became suspect, slowing advances as invaders hesitated, probing the ground ahead like soldiers in a minefield. Gardeners mastered the art of misdirection with these tools. They'd plant soft, inviting moss near caltrop-laden zones, luring feet toward concealed spikes. Others arranged them in staggered patterns, ensuring that even if one was spotted, the next would go unnoticed. During sieges, entire garden borders could be transformed into gauntlets of hidden pain, their cheerful flowers mocking the agony unfolding below. And because the caltrops resembled natural debris, there was no evidence to trace back to the castle's defenders, just another unfortunate accident in a world where gardens, like their keepers, were far more than they seemed. The legacy of these tiny terrors endures in modern security. Today's spike strips and anti-climb barriers owe a debt to those medieval gardeners who first weaponized the ground beneath our feet. But there's a chilling elegance to the original, a weapon that required no maintenance, no reloading, just the patience to let nature's beauty hide its teeth until the moment of attack. In the end, the flowerbed caltrop was more than a tool. It was a reminder that in the shadows of a castle, even the earth could betray you. Rotating sundial compasses were the ultimate sleight of hand, functional garden ornaments by day, clandestine navigation tools by night. To any casual observer, these were simply elegant timepieces, their bronze faces catching the sunlight as they marked the passing hours. But with a deft twist of the base, the entire dial would pivot to reveal a hidden magnetic compass beneath, its needle trembling toward true north even in pitch darkness. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a lifeline for gardeners moving through the castle's labyrinthine grounds after sunset, when torches might betray their position or moonless nights turned familiar paths into treacherous mazes. The genius lay in the sundial's dual purpose. During daylight, the shadow cast by its gnomon could be deliberately misaligned by a few degrees, creating a coded signal for those who knew how to read it. A slight tilt to the east might warn of approaching riders from the forest road, while a westward adjustment could indicate that the granary stores had been compromised. Since sundials were common features in noble gardens, these subtle shifts went unnoticed by all but the initiated. Historical records from French castles describe gardeners using specific shadow lengths to coordinate rendezvous meeting at the herb garden when the dial's shadow touched the third marker, or delaying a mission if it fell short of the fifth. What made these devices truly remarkable was their resistance to suspicion. Unlike maps or coded letters, which could be confiscated or deciphered, a sundial's secrets were written in sunlight and erased with the clouds. Even if an enemy grew wary, inspecting the dial would reveal nothing but polished metal and carved numerals. Some versions took the deception further, with hollow stems that could store tiny scrolls or lockpicks, turning an innocent garden feature into a full espionage toolkit. The best craftsmen even weighted the compass needles to account for local magnetic variations, ensuring that gardeners navigating fog-shrouded courtyards or moonlit tunnels never lost their way. The rotating sundial compass exemplifies the medieval gardener's razor-sharp balance between visibility and secrecy. While guards carried conspicuous lanterns and scouts relied on easily intercepted horn signals, the gardener's tools blended seamlessly into their environment. A noble might pause to check the time, oblivious that the very instrument measuring his day was also guiding covert operations under his nose. It's a testament to the ingenuity of an era where every object held layers of meaning, where even time itself could be weaponized, one carefully adjusted shadow at a time. Moss-covered alarm wires turned the castle's most tranquil corners into silent sentinels, proving that sometimes the simplest tools were the most diabolical. Imagine a secluded garden path, its edges soft with emerald moss, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming thyme. To any visitor, it was a peaceful retreat, but beneath that velvety green carpet ran a network of hair-thin wires, nearly invisible against the foliage. These weren't just decorative, they were tensioned to perfection, connected to a series of hidden bells or chimes tucked inside hollow garden ornaments or beneath stone benches. One misplaced step, one careless brush against the moss, and the wires would tremble, sending a delicate ping echoing through the castle's private quarters. A sound as innocuous as wind chimes to the untrained ear, but a glaring alarm to those who knew its meaning. The brilliance of this system lay in its utter simplicity. Unlike iron gates or barred doors which announced their presence boldly, these wires exploited the natural landscape. Gardeners would carefully cultivate the moss around them, ensuring it grew thick enough to conceal the metal, but not so dense that it muffled the vibrations. Some accounts describe wires strung at ankle height near secluded arbors or along the base of garden walls, places where spies or illicit lovers might linger, unaware they'd tripped an invisible alarm. Others were suspended vertically through hanging vines, catching anyone who pushed through the foliage too roughly. The moss served more than just camouflage. Its moisture prevented the wires from rusting or snapping in harsh weather, making it a self-maintaining defense. What made these alarms so effective was their psychological precision. The sound they produced wasn't a clanging bell or blaring horn. It was subtle, localized, almost musical. An intruder might dismiss it as nature's whisper, while a gardener stationed in a nearby alcove would immediately know exactly which sector of the garden had been breached. Some castles even used coded arrangements, a single chime for the herb garden, two for the rose trellises, allowing defenders to pinpoint disturbances without revealing their knowledge. And because the wires were near impossible to spot without deliberate inspection, they remained effective for years, long after invaders assumed they'd memorized every trap. Maintenance was a quiet art. Gardeners would tend to the moss beds daily, their hands gliding over the wires to test their tension, their ears attuned to the slightest change in pitch that might indicate wear. Historical records suggest some wires were coated in beeswax to mute accidental vibrations from birds or falling leaves, ensuring only human contact triggered the alarm. Others were threaded through hollow reeds or bamboo stalks, disguising them as natural growth. The system was so refined that during sieges, gardeners could reposition the wires overnight, creating shifting zones of danger that left enemies paranoid about every footfall. The legacy of these mossy tripwires is a testament to medieval ingenuity. In an era before motion sensors or surveillance cameras, castle defenders harnessed nature itself as a silent ally. A garden might appear to be a place of respite, but beneath its lush surface lay a web of invisible threads, each one a whisper waiting to betray the careless. It's a reminder that in the world of castle intrigue, even the softest moss could have teeth, and the quietest chime could spell disaster for those who underestimated the gardener's craft. Beehive Barricades turned one of nature's most industrious creatures into a living, buzzing weapon, a defensive tactic as sweet as it was savage. These weren't just ordinary hives tucked away in a quiet corner of the garden. They were carefully positioned siege breakers, often perched on elevated platforms near gatehouses, armories, or along narrow pathways where invaders would bottleneck. At first glance, they appeared to serve a purely practical purpose, producing honey for the castle's kitchens. But with a sharp tug on a hidden lever, a gardener could send the entire structure crashing to the ground, unleashing a storm of enraged bees upon anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. The true cunning lay in the bees themselves. Medieval gardeners didn't rely on chance aggression. They actively trained their hives to associate unfamiliar scents with threat. By periodically exposing the colonies to the odors of foreign perfumes, armor polish, or even the sweat of captured spies, they conditioned the insects to attack intruders on instinct. Historical accounts describe besiegers fleeing in terror as clouds of bees zeroed in on the scent of their oiled leather boots or the unfamiliar dyes in their cloaks, while castle defenders who wore untreated wool and avoided perfumes moved through the chaos unscathed. Some beekeepers even rubbed hive entrances with herbs like mint or thyme, creating a friendly scent that bees would ignore, giving allies a split-second advantage during the chaos. Placement was a brutal science. Hives near the armory could stall attackers long enough for defenders to arm themselves, while those along outer walls disrupted scaling attempts, forcing climbers to choose between falling or being stung into submission. The hive's wooden stands were often designed to collapse at an angle, ensuring the bees erupted outward like living shrapnel rather than dispersing harmlessly upward. And because honey was a valuable commodity, no one questioned why gardeners tended these hives with such devotion. It was the perfect cover for what was essentially a biological minefield. What's chilling is how these barricades exploited the medieval world's dependence on nature. While knights relied on steel and archers on arrows, gardeners wielded something far more unpredictable: thousands of tiny, venomous bodies acting in unison. A single-tipped hive could turn the tide of a skirmish, buying precious minutes for reinforcements to arrive or allowing trapped nobles to escape through secret passages. And unlike conventional traps, beehives replenished themselves. Every attack only made the surviving bees more aggressive, ensuring the castle's defenses grew stronger with each assault. The legacy of these living weapons endures in modern warfare's use of natural deterrents, but there's something uniquely medieval about the bee barricades duality. It was both a pantry staple and a panic-inducing terror, a reminder that in the right hands, even the gentlest creatures could become instruments of chaos. For invaders, the lesson was clear. In a castle where the garden fought back, every flower, every vine, and every humming hive was a potential adversary. False well drop boxes turned one of the castle's most vital resources into a perfect dead drop location right under everyone's noses. From the surface, these wells appeared entirely ordinary, stone-lined shafts with creaky wooden pulleys, their buckets rising and lowering dozens of times a day to draw water for kitchens, stables, and gardens. But halfway down the damp walls, hidden behind a curtain of shadow, a narrow ledge jutted out just wide enough to hold a rolled parchment, a small vial of poison, or even a slim dagger. The gardener responsible for maintaining the well knew exactly how far to lower the bucket to brush against this secret shelf, retrieving or depositing items without ever breaking rhythm. The auditory deception was flawless. The groan of the pulley, the splash of water, and the clatter of the bucket against stone created a symphony of mundane sounds that drowned out any faint scrape of hidden compartments. Even if someone stood nearby, they'd hear nothing unusual, just the routine work of drawing water. Historical records from Scottish castles describe messengers nonchalantly dropping pebbles into the well as a signal, the plinking stones masking the soft thud of a concealed package hitting the ledge below. Others suggest gardeners would hum or whistle while working, using the melody's tempo to time their covert retrievals. What made these false wells so effective was their sheer ubiquity. Every castle had them. Every person from scullery maids to visiting nobles used them. Their constant traffic made them the last place anyone would suspect for espionage. A spy could linger near the well, pretending to wash their hands while discreetly palming a message from the bucket's underside. A gardener might accidentally knock over a full bucket, using the commotion to snatch a hidden item before anyone noticed. Some wells even had coded notches in their pulleys, allowing operatives to confirm whether a drop had been collected by the position of the rope. The ledge's placement was a masterstroke of engineering. Too high and it risked exposure during routine cleaning. Too low and rising groundwater might ruin delicate contraband. Instead, it occupied a Goldilocks zone, deep enough to evade casual inspection but accessible with practiced precision. During sieges, these ledges became lifelines, smuggling food or medicine past enemy blockades. A loaf of bread wrapped in waxed cloth could be tucked beside the stones, retrieved under cover of darkness when hunger gnawed at the defenders. Other accounts tell of poisoned wineskins left for unsuspecting invaders, their contents sipped before anyone thought to question why the castle's well water tasted strangely sweet. The psychological brilliance of the false well was its exploitation of human habit. People trust what they use every day. A guard might search a suspicious traveler's satchel, but wouldn't think to rappel into the well shaft. A noble might cipher their letters, but wouldn't suspect the servant drawing their bathwater. In the end, these hidden ledges proved that the best secrets aren't buried in vaults or behind locked doors. They're left in plain sight, dangling in the darkness where only the right hands know how to reach them. Vine-entangled tripwires turned nature's most graceful climbers into silent guardians of the castle walls. These weren't clumsy ropes strung across pathways, they were near-invisible threads, meticulously woven into the stems of ivy, wisteria, and creeping roses. To the untrained eye, the vines appeared to grow wild, their tendrils curling lazily over trellises and archways. But hidden among those leaves were hair-thin wires, their ends connected to counterweights or hollowed-out gourds filled with pebbles. One careless tug, and the entire network would come alive, sending weights crashing onto stone or rattling gourds echoing through the night like spectral warnings. The artistry of these traps lay in their organic camouflage. Gardeners didn't just hide the wires, they trained the vines to grow around them, guiding shoots to curl naturally over the strands until metal and plant became indistinguishable. Some tripwires were even coated in tree sap or beeswax to dull their metallic sheen, ensuring they reflected no telltale glint of moonlight. Historical accounts describe invaders scaling walls by moonlight, their fingers groping for purchase among the vines, only to freeze as a sudden clatter of stones erupted from nowhere. By the time they realized their mistake, guards were already rushing toward the sound, drawn like hounds to a scent. Placement was a psychological game. Tripwires weren't clustered where invaders expected them near gates or guard posts, but along seemingly safe routes, like the overgrown lattice beside the chapel or the ivy-choked alcove near the herb garden. The vine's natural sway in the wind provided cover, making accidental triggers seem like gusts rather than tampering. Gardeners would prune surrounding foliage to direct climbers toward the trapped vines, their hands subtly encouraging the growth of thicker leaves around the wires to mask their presence. Some versions used vines with irritating sap, like poison ivy or nettle hybrids, so even if the tripwire failed, the intruder's swollen, itching hands would betray their attempt. Maintenance was a delicate dance. Too much interference, and the vines might grow unnaturally. Too little, and the wires could sag or rust. Gardeners developed routines adjusting tension during seasonal growth spurts, replacing wires disguised as dead tendrils, even using hollowed-out vine segments to shield mechanisms from rain. The system was so refined that some castles employed dummy tripwire strands designed to snap harmlessly, conditioning invaders to dismiss the first rattle as a false alarm, only to walk headlong into a real trap moments later. What's chilling is how these living tripwires exploited the medieval reverence for nature. A knight might distrust a locked door or a guarded passage, but who would suspect the ivy clinging to the garden wall? The vine's beauty made them the perfect accomplices, their blossoms a siren song luring intruders into a web of invisible peril. In the end, the greatest strength of these traps wasn't their complexity, it was their sheer audacity. They proved that in a castle where even the plants conspired against you, no handhold could ever be trusted. Scent-masking herb pouches were the medieval equivalent of a smoke bomb, tiny, unassuming, and devastatingly effective at vanishing without a trace. These weren't just bundles of fragrant lavender or rosemary tied to a gardener's belt for show. They were carefully curated mixtures of pungent herbs, each selected to overwhelm the keen noses of tracking hounds or suspicious guards. Picture a gardener kneeling to prune a hedge, their hands brushing against a pouch of crushed mint, rue, and valerian root tucked discreetly in their apron. To anyone nearby, the air would suddenly bloom with an overpowering herbal cloud, masking the scent of sweat, leather, or even the metallic tang of hidden weaponry. The science behind these pouches was surprisingly advanced for the era. Gardeners understood that certain scents could short-circuit a dog's tracking instincts, like scattering mental static across a scent trail. A blend of garlic and mustard seed could make a pursuer's nose twitch with confusion, while wormwood and tansy created a bitter barrier no hound would willingly push through. Some accounts describe pouches lined with animal fat to absorb and neutralize human scent, turning the wearer into a ghost in the garden. The real brilliance, though, lay in their dual use. Tossed into a guard's post or near a barracks window, These pouches could trigger sneezing fits or watery eyes, giving a spy precious seconds to slip past undetected. Deployment was an art in itself. A gardener might accidentally crush a pouch while tending herbs near the kennels, sending tracking dogs into frantic circles. Others sewed the pouches into the hems of cloaks, releasing their aroma with a subtle flick of fabric when passing through guarded areas. The strongest blends weren't just masks, they were weapons. Historical records from English castles mention pouches stuffed with dried stinkhorn mushrooms or fermented hedge garlic, scents so vile they could clear a room or trigger retching. Imagine a night watchman leaning against a garden wall, only to recoil as an invisible wave of rot assaulted his senses, leaving him gagging while an intruder melted into the shadows. What's fascinating is how these pouches exploited the medieval reliance on scent for both survival and suspicion. Dogs tracked fugitives, guards sniffed for spoiled food or poison, and nobles perfumed themselves to signal status. In that world, controlling smell was power. A gardener's pouch could turn their body into a blank slate or weaponize the air itself, all while looking like nothing more than a harmless bundle of garden clippings. The lesson was clear. In a castle where every sense could be turned against you, sometimes the sharpest weapon was the one you couldn't see, only smell. Hollow walking sticks were the ultimate props in a gardener's disguise, tools that screamed frailty while hiding steel-cold utility. At first glance, these carved staffs appeared to be nothing more than aids for an aging or injured laborer, their gnarled wood and worn handles suggesting years of humble use. But a twist of the pommel could reveal their secret, a hollow core just wide enough to stash a rolled parchment, a set of lockpicks, or a slender blade thin as a rose thorn. The sticks weren't just concealment devices, they were mobile armories, allowing gardeners to traverse the castle with an arsenal disguised as mere support. The craftsmanship behind these sticks was deceptively elegant. Many featured intricate floral motifs or scenes from pastoral life, not just for beauty, but to draw the eye away from telltale seams or subtle weight imbalances. A noble admiring the carvings might miss the faint click of a hidden compartment opening. Others had weighted bottoms to ensure the stick always landed upright if dropped, preventing accidental reveals. Historical records describe some versions with threaded tips that unscrewed to expose a spike for etching messages into soft stone or wax tablets, turning an innocuous walking aid into a clandestine writing tool. Mobility was their greatest strength. Unlike buried caches or fixed hiding spots, these sticks went wherever the gardener did. A stroll through the herb garden could deliver a poisoned vial to an ally. A pause to rest near the barracks might deposit a coded message into a waiting hand. The hollow core also served as an early warning system. Sliding a pebble inside would create a subtle rattle if the stick was tampered with, alerting the gardener to prying hands. Some accounts even mention sticks with compartments lined with beeswax to muffle the sound of concealed metal, ensuring no telltale clink betrayed their contents. What made these sticks so effective was their exploitation of medieval social hierarchies. A limping gardener evoked pity, not suspicion. Guards would hold gates open for them, servants step aside to let them pass, all while the stick's hidden payload moved unchallenged through the castle's heart. In sieges, they became lifelines, smuggling keys to prisoners or rationed food to starving defenders. And because every castle had elderly or injured staff, the sticks blended seamlessly into daily life. A knight might search a merchant's satchel or a minstrel's lute, but who would interrogate a worn wooden cane? The legacy of these hollow staffs is a lesson in psychological warfare. They proved that in a world obsessed with visible strength, towering walls, gleaming armor, the most potent weapons were often the ones that leaned quietly in the corner, waiting for the right moment to reveal their teeth. After all, the best place to hide a dagger wasn't in the shadows. It was in the hand of someone everyone assumed couldn't even lift one. Moonlight reflecting mirrors turned the night itself into a messenger, their fleeting glimmers carrying secrets across impossible distances. These weren't the grand, ornate mirrors of castle halls. They were small, unassuming plates of polished bronze or silver, hidden among garden ornaments like sundials, bird baths, or even tucked into the petals of metal flowers. To the untrained eye, they were just decorative glints beneath the stars, but in the hands of a gardener, they became a language of light, flashing coded signals to scouts waiting in distant hills or allies concealed in the forest's edge. A flicker here, a pause, another flicker, each sequence precise enough to convey troop movements, breach points, or warnings of approaching danger. The brilliance of these mirrors lay in their deniability. Unlike torch signals or smoke plumes, which screamed intentionality, a mirror's reflection could be dismissed as a trick of the moonlight on water or a stray spark from a watchman's lantern. Gardeners mastered the art of timing, angling their mirrors to catch the moon at just the right moment, sending signals that lasted no longer than a blink. Historical accounts describe sentries squinting into the darkness, certain they'd seen something, only to shrug it off as fatigue when the light didn't reappear. Meanwhile, a rebel force miles away was already shifting position, guided by those deliberate, vanishing flashes. Placement was a meticulous science. Mirrors were never positioned where they might attract attention, never atop walls or towers where their gleam would be obvious. Instead, they nestled among climbing roses or perched atop faux boulders, their reflections masked by the natural shimmer of dew or the occasional firefly. Some were even designed to pivot subtly with the wind, their mounts disguised as weather vanes or decorative wind chimes, ensuring their angles shifted just enough to reach different outposts without manual adjustment. A gardener might spend hours pruning a hedge, quietly realigning mirrors to account for the moon's phase or the growing season's foliage. The true mastery, though, was in the code. A single flash could mean all clear, while a rapid trio might signal an approaching siege. Some castles used the mirror's positions to indicate numbers low to the ground for infantry, higher up for cavalry, allowing gardeners to transmit complex messages without a single spoken word. The risk of interception was minimal. Unless you knew exactly where to look, the signals were as invisible as whispers in a storm. And because moonlight was free and limitless, these mirrors required no replenishment, no fuel, just the patience to wait for cloudless nights and the steady hands of those who knew how to speak without sound. What's haunting is how these devices exploited the human tendency to rationalize the unexplained. A guard might report a strange glimmer, only to be laughed away by his comrades for seeing ghosts in the garden. The mirror's greatest strength wasn't their brightness, it was their ability to make doubt work in their favor. In a world where castles relied on drums, horns, and shouted alerts, the quietest communication system was the one no one believed existed. By the time an enemy realized the garden itself was talking, it was often too late. The mirrors had already done their work, their messages carried on beams of borrowed light, leaving nothing behind but the lingering suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the moon had been watching too. Poisonous pollen puffers were the medieval equivalent of invisible gas attacks, tiny, unassuming, and devastatingly precise. Imagine a gardener kneeling among the lavender, their hands gently squeezing a small, leather bellows that looked no different from the tools used to stoke herb-drying fires. But inside that innocuous device lay a carefully collected payload of pollen from plants like foxglove, henbane, or ragweed, each grain a potential trigger for coughing fits, blurred vision, or even temporary paralysis. With a few deft pumps, the gardener could send a nearly invisible cloud drifting toward a specific target, a nosy noble lingering too close to private conversations, or an enemy scout crouched in the hedgerows, while the surrounding blossoms provided perfect cover for the attack. The genius of these puffers was their surgical precision. Unlike smoke pots or chemical sprays that affected wide areas, pollen clouds could be directed with startling accuracy. A gardener might pretend to tend a patch of daisies, angling the bellows upward to catch a breeze that would carry the pollen straight into an open tower window where an eavesdropping rival held court. Because the pollen was natural, it left no traces of foul play, just another unfortunate case of seasonal allergies or a passing dizzy spell. Historical records describe banquets where entire tables of guests suddenly found themselves wheezing, their symptoms dismissed as bad wine or spoiled meat, never suspecting the gardener who'd accidentally brushed against the floral centerpiece moments earlier. What made these devices so chilling was their botanical camouflage. Every castle garden already teemed with pollen floating from roses, drifting off oak trees, shaken loose by bees. Adding a toxic variety to the mix was like hiding a dagger in a haystack. Even if a victim grew suspicious, how could they prove which flower had betrayed them? Some puffers were equipped with interchangeable chambers, allowing gardeners to switch between irritants and incapacitants depending on the need. A mild dose of ragweed might send a bothersome scribe fleeing with itchy eyes, while a concentrated foxglove puff could leave a traitor gasping long enough for guards to intervene. Maintenance was a dark art. Gardeners cultivated patches of toxic plants in secluded corners, labeling them as medicinal herbs to explain their presence. They'd harvest pollen at dawn when it was most potent, storing it in wax-sealed compartments to keep it dry and ready. The bellows themselves were often disguised as animal bladders or wine skins, their true purpose hidden behind layers of plausible deniability. And because pollen was ephemeral, scattering on the wind, dissolving in rain, there was no evidence left behind, no smoking gun to trace back to the gardener's hands. The legacy of these puffers reveals a brutal truth about medieval power dynamics. In a world where poison was the weapon of cowards and assassins, pollen offered the perfect alibi. A noble might employ food tasters to check for toxins in their wine, but who would think to screen the very air they breathed? It was a reminder that in the shadow of castle walls, even nature's gentlest gifts could be weaponized, one invisible, breathless gasp at a time. Decoy vegetable patches were the ultimate test of a castle gardener's poker face, lush, inviting, and utterly treacherous. Picture a thriving plot of carrots, their green fronds swaying in the breeze, or rows of plump turnips peeking from the soil. To a hungry invader or a desperate scout, these gardens would seem like a gift from the heavens, a chance to pilfer fresh food under cover of darkness. But beneath that tempting surface lay a nightmare waiting to unfold. The soil wasn't just loose, it was deliberately loosened, hiding pit traps lined with sharpened stakes or buried spikes. One wrong step and the ground would give way, plunging the thief into a hidden abyss or leaving them impaled on stakes disguised as root clusters. The psychological cruelty of these decoys was masterful. Unlike obvious traps like spiked moats or barred gates, the vegetable patches exploited basic human instinct, hunger. A soldier on a night patrol, stomach growling, would let his guard down at the sight of edible greens. Even seasoned scouts, trained to spot tripwires or concealed ditches, might dismiss a seemingly innocuous garden as harmless. Gardeners played into this by rotating the decoy plots seasonally, ensuring they always appeared freshly tended. A spring patch might feature young lettuce, its tender leaves hiding a shallow trench filled with caltrops. By autumn, it could be replaced with a sprawling pumpkin vine, its broad leaves obscuring a collapsible pit lined with poisoned thorns. Maintenance was a dark art. Gardeners would water these traps just enough to keep the plants thriving, but never so much that the soil became suspiciously muddy. They'd even scatter a few genuine, untampered crops along the edges enough to lure invaders deeper into the danger zone. Historical accounts from French castles describe decoy patches planted near siege tunnels, where the enemy's own hunger became a weapon against them. A group of sappers, tunneling for weeks on stale rations, would inevitably raid the garden above, only to lose half their men to concealed spikes or collapsing earth. But these gardens weren't just about punishment, they were also about misdirection. Some concealed buried supply caches for the castle's defenders, hidden beneath layers of false bottoms. A seemingly harvested potato patch might actually shelter a sealed clay jar of grain or a wrapped bundle of arrows, accessible only to those who knew which plants marked the safe path. Others served as early warning systems, with hollow gourds or weighted strings rigged to clatter if disturbed, alerting guards to intruders long before they reached the walls. The true brilliance of the decoy system was its adaptability. In peacetime, these plots could be harvested normally, their traps disarmed with a few quick adjustments. But when danger loomed, a gardener's quiet afternoon of weeding might actually be spent rearming stakes or repositioning pitfalls. It was a reminder that in the medieval world, nothing was ever as it seemed, not even the humble carrot. For every invader who learned that lesson the hard way, there were a dozen more still waiting to stumble into the garden's silent, smiling jaws. Whispering hedge tunnels turned the castle's most manicured greenery into a sprawling network of natural eavesdropping devices. These weren't just decorative shrubbery, they were meticulously sculpted sound channels, their dense foliage trimmed to funnel whispers like a botanical whispering gallery. Imagine a gardener pruning a hedge with seemingly ordinary care, their shears shaping the leaves into subtle concave curves or angled corridors. To a passing noble or visiting dignitary, the hedges were merely elegant borders framing garden paths. But stand too close and the greenery itself would betray you, carrying your muttered secrets straight to a gardener's waiting ear. The science behind these living sound amplifiers was astonishingly precise. By trimming the hedges into parabolic shapes or narrow, fluted channels, gardeners could exploit the physics of sound waves. Voices bouncing off the dense leaves would converge at specific focal points, often near a concealed bench, a gardener's tool shed, or even a hollowed-out garden ornament. Historical records describe tunnels shaped like keyholes, where the wide end captured broad conversations from a courtyard, while the narrow terminus directed those words with eerie clarity to a hidden listener. Some designs even incorporated small openings disguised as bird perches, allowing sound to escape upward to elevated guard posts or tower windows. Maintenance was a clandestine art. Gardeners would test the hedge's acoustics by humming softly while working, adjusting a branch here or a leaf cluster there to perfect the sound's path. Overgrown sections were thinned just enough to reduce rustling, any noise that might mask whispered words, while strategic gaps were left near seating areas to capture the clearest audio. The most cunning tunnels included false starts, where a hedge would appear to funnel sound toward a decorative fountain or statue, only for the real channel to divert voices sideways to a shadowed alcove. The psychological impact was profound. Unlike stone walls that echoed or tapestries that muffled sound, these hedges offered no warning of their surveillance. A lord might stroll through the garden, confiding in a trusted advisor, unaware that the very air around them had been weaponized by topiary. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the chirping of birds nestled in the branches, all of it masked the unnatural precision of the sound's journey. Even the most paranoid courtier wouldn't think to scrutinize a hedge for spies. leaving gardeners to harvest secrets as effortlessly as they harvested herbs. What's haunting is how these living tools blurred the line between nature and technology. While other castles relied on human spies or mechanical listening tubes, the Whispering Tunnels required no maintenance beyond routine trimming, no conspirators beyond the gardeners who shaped them. They were surveillance systems that grew more effective with time, their foliage thickening to better trap sound, their roots sinking deeper into the castle's soil and its secrets. In the end, the lesson was clear. In a world where even the hedges had ears, silence was the only safe companion. Camouflaged arrow quivers transformed the humble wicker basket into a masterclass in deception, tools that carried death as casually as they carried pruning shears. To any passing guard or visiting noble, these baskets looked utterly ordinary, woven from river reeds lined with burlap, their contents spilling over with gardening gloves, trowels, and bundles of twine. But lift the false bottom, and the truth revealed itself, a hidden compartment neatly packed with arrows or crossbow bolts, each one ready to be distributed in the blink of an eye. The basket's tight weave served a dual purpose, flexible enough to absorb the clatter of moving arrows, yet dense enough to conceal their outline from even the most suspicious observer. The genius of this design lay in its speed and plausibility. During an attack, every second counted. While guards scrambled to armory towers or barracks, a gardener could dart through the chaos, their basket swaying as if rushing to protect delicate seedlings. By the time they reached the battlements, defenders had only to reach in and arm themselves, no fumbling with locked chests or distant storage rooms. Historical accounts from English castles describe siege preparations where gardeners, coincidentally, positioned these baskets near key defensive points days in advance, ensuring arrows were never more than a few paces away when the first enemy banners appeared on the horizon. What made these quivers so effective was their sheer mundanity. Wicker baskets were everywhere in castle life, hauling vegetables from gardens, transporting firewood, even serving as makeshift seats during outdoor feasts. Their presence raised no alarms, even when stacked conspicuously near arrow loops or gatehouses. Some versions featured reinforced handles to support the extra weight of hidden ammunition, while others had subtle notches along the rim to indicate which baskets held broadhead arrows for piercing armor versus bodkin points for picking off scouts. A gardener might spend their morning humming as they arranged these decoys, all while memorizing which noble's private garden hid the emergency stash of fire arrows. The psychological deception was flawless. In a world where weapons were symbols of status, gleaming swords on hips, polished halberds at gates, the idea that death could lurk in something as plain as a basket was unthinkable. Even if an invading force searched the castle, they'd toss aside a gardener's tools without a second glance. And because the baskets were lightweight and portable, they could be relocated at a moment's notice, turning a sunny herb garden into an impromptu armory or a quiet courtyard into a sniper's nest. Maintenance was a quiet art. Gardeners would periodically rotate the baskets to prevent wear patterns from betraying their heaviness, occasionally lining the false bottoms with dried moss to muffle any telltale rattles. Some accounts suggest they even wove specific patterns into the reeds, a spiral for arrows, a crosshatch for bolts, allowing allies to identify the contents at a glance without breaking stride. The system was so refined that during one famous siege, defenders reportedly held a breached wall for hours using nothing but arrows smuggled in under armfuls of freshly cut flowers. The legacy of these covert quivers is a testament to medieval ingenuity. They proved that in a life or death struggle, the most effective weapons weren't always the ones brandished openly. Sometimes they were the ones tucked beneath a trowel and a smile. After all, in a castle where even the gardening supplies could turn the tide of battle, nowhere was safe, and nothing was truly as it seemed. Rotting fruit grenades turned nature's inevitable decay into one of the most psychologically devastating weapons in a castle gardener's arsenal. Picture an orchard in late summer, branches sagging with overripe apples and pears, some so soft they'd burst at the slightest touch. To the untrained eye, these were just forgotten fruits destined for the compost heap. But in the hands of a resourceful gardener, they became organic bombs, their mushy flesh hollowed out and packed with crushed glass, rusty nails, or even vials of fermented animal bile. The moment one struck its target, the rotting skin would rupture, spraying shrapnel and stench in equal measure. The combination of physical injury and overwhelming odor was enough to send even the hardiest invaders fleeing in disgust. The genius of these grenades lay in their perfect camouflage. Unlike metal caltrops or wooden traps, rotting fruit was a natural part of any garden's life cycle. Piles of it were left deliberately near orchard walls or along pathways, their putrid aroma deterring casual inspection. No guard would think twice about a cluster of blackened peaches until one exploded at their feet, filling the air with a cloud of acrid pulp and embedded debris. Historical accounts from Mediterranean castles describe besiegers retreating from makeshift barricades, not from arrows or boiling oil, but from the sheer horror of projectiles that smelled like death itself. Preparation was a macabre art. Gardeners would select fruits at peak ripeness, carefully carving out the cores with spoon-like tools to leave the skin intact. Some filled the hollows with quicklime or powdered irritants like crushed nettles, creating a caustic dust that burned eyes and lungs. Others layered in sticky substances like pine resin or tar, ensuring whatever the fruit struck would be left coated in a lingering, foul-smelling residue. The most sinister versions used the fruit's natural sugars to cultivate toxic molds, turning each grenade into a biological hazard capable of sickening entire battalions. Deployment required chilling precision. During sieges, gardeners would lob these grenades from upper garden terraces or conceal them in baskets of fresh produce delivered to enemy camps. The fruit's weight made them unpredictable in flight, some bursting midair like grotesque fireworks, others rolling into crowds before detonating underfoot. Their true power, though, was psychological. Unlike conventional weapons that inspired anger or defiance, rotting fruit grenades triggered visceral revulsion. A soldier might stand firm against a sword strike, but would instinctively recoil from a splatter of maggot-ridden pulp. The legacy of these grotesque weapons reveals a brutal truth about medieval warfare. Sometimes, the most effective tools weren't the sharpest or the strongest. They were the ones that turned human instinct against itself. In a world where honor was tied to clean steel and gleaming armor, there was no glory in being bested by a piece of fruit, and for the gardeners who wielded them, that was precisely the point. Sundial lock mechanisms turned time itself into a key, an elegant fusion of astronomy, engineering, and pure deception. Imagine approaching a wrought iron garden gate, its latch seemingly frozen in place no matter how hard you pushed or pulled. To the uninitiated, it might appear rusted shut or broken, but a castle gardener would simply glance at the ornamental sundial mounted nearby, waiting patiently until the shadow of its gnomon touched a nearly invisible notch along the stone rim. With that precise alignment, a hidden counterweight would release, allowing the gate to swing open as smoothly as if it had been oiled moments before. The secret wasn't in the strength of the lock, it was in knowing exactly when the sun would whisper the password. The sophistication of these mechanisms bordered on artistry. Craftsmen didn't just carve sundials to tell time, they calibrated them like celestial safes. The key wasn't a physical object but a fleeting moment, often at an unconventional hour like mid-morning or late afternoon when shadows fell at oblique angles. Some designs required multiple alignments, first the hour line, then the tip of the shadow brushing against a specific flower carved into the base. Historical records from Spanish monasteries describe gates that only opened during the summer solstice, their sundials engineered to account for the sun's shifting path. A gardener might spend years learning these rhythms, their daily routines syncing with solar movements as reliably as the tides. What made these locks so secure was their resistance to brute force. Picking them was impossible. There were no tumblers to manipulate, no keyholes to probe. Forcing the gate would only trigger internal countermeasures, like dropping a concealed bar across the doorframe or alerting guards via hidden chimes. Even if an intruder suspected the sundial's role, decoding its secrets required more than observation. Without knowing which mark to watch for or how seasonal changes affected the shadow's trajectory, they'd be left stranded outside, watching helplessly as the gardener slipped through with effortless grace. The psychological brilliance lay in the lock's invisibility. Unlike barred gates or patrolled entrances which announced their importance, these mechanisms hid in plain sight. A spy might sketch every visible lock or note guard rotations, never realizing the true barrier was painted in sunlight and shadows. Some castles took the deception further, installing decoy sundials with no function at all, while the real key was a modest, moss-covered marker half buried in the herb garden. The message was clear: in this world, time didn't just pass it guarded. Maintenance was a sacred duty. Gardeners would polish the sundial's face to prevent weathering from dulling its precision, or adjust its tilt after heavy storms that might have shifted the base. During prolonged cloud cover, they'd rely on memorized intervals or hidden water clocks to approximate the solar alignment. The most intricate systems even accounted for the slow wobble of the Earth's axis over centuries, their markings subtly spaced to remain accurate for generations. The legacy of sundial locks is a testament to medieval ingenuity. In an era before combination safes or fingerprint scanners, they offered something far more elusive, a key that couldn't be stolen, only understood. For the gardeners who wielded this knowledge, every sunrise wasn't just the start of a new day, it was the turning of a cosmic lock, one that opened only for those who knew how to listen to the silent language of the sun. Fishpond escape routes transformed serene garden water features into lifelines of last resort, ornamental on the surface, treacherous beneath. These weren't just shallow basins for koi or lilies. They were carefully engineered aquatic highways, their depths concealing narrow, waterlogged tunnels that snaked outward to the castle's outer walls or nearby forests. To a casual observer, the pond's murky green water and swaying reeds suggested nothing more than a tranquil retreat. But in moments of crisis, that same water became a veil, masking the frantic movements of fleeing nobles or wounded soldiers as they slipped beneath the surface, their escape guided by the very gardeners who'd spent years pretending to do nothing more than rake algae. The logistics of these submerged passages were astonishing. Unlike dry escape tunnels, which required constant ventilation and reinforcement, these routes exploited natural water flow to remain structurally sound. Gardeners would discreetly divert small springs or underground streams to feed the ponds, ensuring currents kept the tunnels clear of silt and debris without human intervention. Some designs incorporated grates disguised as rock formations, allowing water to circulate while preventing collapse. The real genius, though, was in the tunnel's entrances, often hidden behind cascading waterfalls or submerged beneath floating plant islands that could be pushed aside with a single, practiced kick. Historical accounts from German castles describe escapees surfacing in distant mill ponds or irrigation ditches, their passage unnoticed thanks to the gardener's careful maintenance of the aquatic road. Maintenance was a life or death ritual. While appearing to tend to water lilies or feed fish, gardeners would secretly test the tunnel's accessibility, wading into the pond to clear blockages or reinforce crumbling sections with strategically placed stones. They'd cultivate dense patches of duckweed or algae near the entrances, not just for camouflage but to oxygenate the water for those holding their breath during the desperate journey. Some ponds even had submerged handholds or guide ropes, invisible from above but tactile lifelines for those groping through the pitch-black passage. The gardener's knowledge of these routes was so precise that they could predict exactly how many breaths it took to traverse each segment, a count whispered only to those who needed it most. The psychological power of these ponds lay in their duality. To enemies, they were decorative afterthoughts unworthy of scrutiny. To allies, they represented the castle's most guarded secret, a way out that required neither keys nor brute strength, just the courage to plunge into the unknown. Imagine a besieged lord stripping off his armor in the dead of night, slipping into the frigid water with nothing but the gardener's final instruction echoing in his mind: follow the current, count to 30, and live. The pond's surface would ripple momentarily, then still, leaving no trace of his passage except a few drifting leaves. What's haunting is how these escape routes turned the natural world into an accomplice. The murky water that obscured movement also preserved silence, swallowing splashes and stifled gasps. Frogs and insects continued their nightly chorus undisturbed, their sounds masking any stray noise from below. Even the pond's seasonal changes played a role: winter ice thick enough to support decorative statues but too thin to bear the weight of pursuing soldiers, summer blooms so dense they hid disturbances in the water. The lesson was clear: in a castle where even the fish ponds could save or doom you, nothing was ever as passive as it seemed. The legacy of these aquatic escapes endures in modern survival tactics, but their medieval origins reveal a profound truth. When walls fall and gates splinter, sometimes salvation lies not in rising above the chaos, but diving straight into its depths, guided by the unseen hands of those who knew the water's secrets best. After all, in a world where gardens grew weapons and ponds hid pathways, the difference between capture and freedom might be as simple as knowing which lily pad to push aside. Weathervane code indicators turned the whims of the wind into a silent language, one that danced above the castle walls, visible to all but understood by few. At first glance, these garden ornaments were utterly ordinary. A rooster or arrow pivoting lazily with the breeze, its movements dictated by nature alone. But in the hands of a castle gardener, that same weathervane became a cipher, its position carefully calibrated to signal everything from approaching enemies to safe houses for fugitives. A slight tilt northeast might mean the eastern gate was under surveillance, while a deliberate wobble could warn allies to avoid the herb garden after dark. The genius lay in its constant motion. Unlike static flags or carved symbols, a weathervane's natural sway provided perfect cover for coded adjustments, making every shift seem like the wind's doing rather than a gardener's handiwork. Crafting these signals required an intimate understanding of both meteorology and human perception. Gardeners knew that most people only glanced at weathervanes in passing long enough to note the wind's general direction, but not enough to detect subtle manipulations. By exploiting this inattention, they could nudge the vane a few degrees off true north, knowing the change would go unnoticed except by those trained to look for it. Historical records from Italian castles describe vanes with counterweighted tails, allowing gardeners to override the wind's pull just long enough to align the arrow with a specific notch on the base. These adjustments were fleeting, just a momentary pause in the veins' dance, but for allies watching from distant hills or hidden chambers, that hesitation spoke volumes. The system's true brilliance was its adaptability. During storms or erratic winds, when a stationary signal might seem suspicious, gardeners could layer their codes into the veins' natural behavior. A rapid spin followed by stillness might indicate imminent danger, while a slow, rhythmic oscillation could confirm a planned rendezvous was still secure. Some designs even incorporated hidden compartments in the veins' finial, where tiny scrolls or tokens could be tucked away, accessible only by climbing the pole during prearranged weather conditions like fog or heavy rain that provided visual cover. Placement was a strategic art. Weather vanes were always positioned where they could be seen from multiple vantage points, towering over courtyards, perched on garden pavilions, or mounted atop ornamental dovecotes. But their visibility was a double-edged sword. While allies could read them from afar, so too could enemies. To counter this, gardeners developed rotating cipher systems, changing the meaning of each angle weekly or even daily. A position that signaled safe passage on Monday might mean ambush ahead by Thursday, ensuring that even if a spy cracked part of the code, their knowledge would soon expire. Maintenance was a delicate performance. Gardeners would inspect the weather vane under the guise of routine upkeep, using their tools to adjust set screws or polish the spindle, all while subtly recalibrating its alignment. Some accounts describe vanes with magnetic bases, allowing gardeners to tweak their position using lodestones hidden in their aprons. Others had adjustable fins that could alter the vane's sensitivity to wind, creating telltale patterns of movement for those who knew how to interpret them. The work demanded nerves of steel. A single fumbled adjustment could expose the entire system, turning a trusted signaling device into a beacon of betrayal. What's haunting is how these weather vanes exploited humanity's tendency to overlook the mundane. In a world where guards scrutinized sealed letters and patrolled secret passages, few thought to question the direction of a garden ornament. Yet for those who spoke its language, the vane was a lifeline, its every turn a whispered warning, its every stillness a held breath. It's a reminder that in the shadow of castle walls, even the wind could carry secrets, if only you knew how to listen. Night-blooming signal flowers turned the castle gardens into a living, breathing map, one that only revealed itself under the cloak of darkness. These weren't just ordinary blossoms that happened to open after sunset. They were meticulously bred and strategically placed to form luminous pathways, their petals glowing like pale beacons in the moonlight. Picture a moonlit garden where clusters of evening primrose, night-blooming cereus, and white angel's trumpet erupted into bloom at precise intervals, their placement anything but random. To a lost ally or a fugitive moving under cover of night, these flowers were a silent guide, a dotted line pointing toward safe passage, hidden gates, or stashed supplies. Their beauty was undeniable, but their true purpose was far more calculated. Nature's own Morse code, written in petals instead of dots and dashes. The precision behind these floral signals was staggering. Gardeners didn't just scatter seeds and hope for the best, they curated each plant's location with the care of a general plotting troop movements. A crescent of night-blooming jasmine might mark the start of a hidden trail, while a spiral of moonflowers could indicate a detour around patrolled areas. The timing of their blooms was just as crucial. Some varieties opened predictably at dusk, while others unfurled their petals only in the deepest hours of the night, creating staggered waypoints for those who knew the sequence. Historical records from Bohemian castles describe gardeners grafting plants to alter their blooming habits, ensuring certain flowers would ignite with color just as the moon reached its zenith. or fade moments before the first light of dawn erased their trail. What made these flowers so effective was their unbreakable alibi. Even if an enemy noticed their patterns, how could they prove intentional design? Flowers bloomed when they pleased, or so it seemed. The gardener's genius lay in exploiting that assumption, using nature's rhythms to mask their handiwork. A guard might admire a patch of glowing evening stock without realizing it was deliberately planted to outline the shadowed path to a secret postern gate. Some castles took the deception further, cultivating identical non-signal varieties in daytime gardens, ensuring the night-blooming counterparts wouldn't stand out as unusual. The logistics of maintenance were a delicate dance. These flowers demanded specific conditions, just enough shade to delay their opening until nightfall, precise pruning to encourage synchronized blooming, and soil enriched with crushed oyster shells or charcoal to intensify their luminosity. Gardeners would often test the system by walking the routes themselves, noting which blooms appeared first, which lingered longest, and adjusting their plantings accordingly. The most sophisticated setups even accounted for seasonal shifts, with early blooming species taking over signaling duties as the nights grew shorter or longer. But perhaps the most chilling aspect was the flower's psychological impact. For allies, their sudden appearance in the dark was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the bleakest hours, the land itself was conspiring to aid them. For enemies, though, the same blossoms were a taunt. A pursuer might catch fleeting glimpses of movement ahead, guided by floral markers he didn't understand, only to lose his quarry in a maze of perfume and petals. The message was clear: in this garden, even the flowers kept secrets. The legacy of these living signals endures in modern navigation tactics, but their medieval roots reveal a profound truth. Long before GPS or infrared markers, survival sometimes depended on knowing which petals would glow in the dark and which hands had planted them. It's a reminder that in the dead of night, when walls and weapons faltered, the quietest allies were often the ones that grew from the earth itself. The Master Gardener's key was the ultimate sleight of hand, a tool that hid in plain sight, masquerading as a symbol of authority while serving as a clandestine cipher. At first glance, it looked like any other ornate key dangling from a gardener's belt, gilded, slightly tarnished, its bow engraved with floral motifs that matched the castle's decor. But this key didn't fit any lock. Its true purpose was far more ingenious. Each tooth along its blade corresponded to a letter or symbol in a coded alphabet, and when pressed into soft wax or clay, it left behind an impression that, to those who knew the cipher, revealed entire messages. A gardener might kneel to adjust a loose garden stone, casually stamping the key into the earth beside it. To a passerby, the mark would resemble nothing more than a random indentation. But to a fellow operative, those grooves spelled out everything from troop movements to warnings of betrayal. The key's brilliance lay in its dual deception. Its lavish design made it seem too decorative to be functional, ensuring it would be dismissed as a mere status symbol. Meanwhile, its very visibility, worn openly, polished to a shine deflected suspicion. No spy would think to confiscate a tool so boldly displayed, especially one that appeared to serve no practical purpose. Historical accounts describe keys with adjustable teeth, allowing gardeners to alter the cipher between seasons or even mid-siege. Some versions had hollow shafts containing miniature scrolls, turning the key into its own hiding place. The most sophisticated designs even incorporated magnetic elements, with certain teeth aligning only when near specific iron-rich stones in the garden, creating context-sensitive codes. Using the key required a choreographed dance of subtlety. A gardener might accidentally drop it near a freshly watered patch of soil, leaving an impression that would dry just enough to hold its shape before being obscured by footprints. Others pressed it into the wax seals of routine correspondence, embedding secrets within official documents. The key's floral engravings provided natural camouflage. What looked like an embellishment might actually mark the start of a coded section. Even the act of cleaning the key could be a ruse, the rhythmic strokes of a polishing cloth, masking the deliberate arrangement of its teeth into a new configuration. What's remarkable is how the key exploited medieval hierarchies. A noble might flaunt a jeweled ring or engraved signet, but a gardener's key beneath notice. Yet in the right hands, it became a linguistic skeleton key, unlocking messages hidden in everything from the texture of a pie crust to the pattern of raked leaves. Its legacy endures in modern cryptography, but there's something uniquely medieval about its elegance, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful secrets aren't locked away. They're carried in the open, waiting for the right eyes to read them. The legacy of medieval garden espionage isn't just a footnote in history, it's a masterclass in how necessity births innovation. These gardeners, dismissed as mere laborers, were actually early pioneers of asymmetrical warfare, turning petals into pawns and pruning shears into precision instruments. Their methods weren't just clever tricks, they laid the groundwork for modern surveillance and sabotage techniques. Consider the hollowed-out watering can's medieval wiretaps that predated electronic eavesdropping by centuries. Or the Thorn Trowels, ancestors of today's concealed blades used by undercover operatives. The gardener's genius lay in their ability to weaponize the mundane, a principle still employed by intelligence agencies worldwide. What's astonishing is how their botanical expertise doubled as psychological warfare. By exploiting the human tendency to overlook the familiar, they created traps and tools that were invisible precisely because they were everywhere. This principle echoes in contemporary espionage, where dead drops now hide in USB chargers instead of false wells, and drones mimic birds rather than relying on weather vanes. Even the concept of plausible deniability, so crucial in modern spycraft, was perfected by these gardeners, who could shrug off a sabotaged saddle or poisoned noble as mere accidents of nature. Their work proved that the best camouflage isn't invisibility, it's the appearance of harmlessness. The ripple effects of their ingenuity extend beyond warfare. Modern security design owes a debt to these medieval innovators. Motion-activated lights, a high-tech evolution of gravel alarm paths, biometric scanners. The spiritual successors to sundial locks, trading sunlight for fingerprints. Even the military's use of trained animals like dolphins detecting underwater mines mirrors the gardener's deployment of bees as living weapons. The parallels are everywhere once you start looking. From the algorithmic patterns of cybersecurity echoing floral ciphers to the way modern architects use green spaces to subtly influence crowd movement, just as those whispering hedges once channeled sound and spies. Yet perhaps their most enduring lesson is about resourcefulness. Without access to forges or armories, these gardeners turned to what they had: plants, soil, and an intimate knowledge of human behavior. In an era of high-tech surveillance, their lo-fi solutions remain startlingly relevant. Guerrilla fighters still use buried spike traps, activists employ hidden messages in mundane objects, and cybersecurity experts warn that the simplest phishing email can breach the most advanced firewall. The medieval gardeners understood what modern spies often forget: that technology is only as effective as the human instincts it exploits. Their legacy challenges our assumptions about innovation. We imagine progress as a straight line from primitive to advanced, but history shows us loops and echoes. The same principles that helped a gardener smuggle a dagger in a walking stick now let hackers hide malware in thumb drives. The moonflower trails guiding fugitives to safety, they're not so different from the UV markers rescue teams use today. This isn't coincidence, it's proof that certain truths about deception and survival transcend time. The true testament to their craft isn't just in the tools they left behind, but in the mindset they embodied. In a world of towering castles and gleaming armor, they demonstrated that power isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's the quiet scrape of a trellis spike, the faintest crunch of gravel underfoot, or the way a single flower blooming out of season could spell the difference between victory and defeat. Their methods remind us that innovation isn't about having the most resources. It's about seeing the potential in what others dismiss. After all, in a garden where even the roses have thorns and the birdhouses have ears, the most dangerous thing of all is underestimating the person holding the trowel. From thorn trowels to whispering hedges, these 26 ingenious tools reveal castle gardeners as history's most unassuming masterminds, horticulturists by day, spies and saboteurs by night. Their legacy isn't just about the tools themselves, but the radical creativity they embodied. In a world where power was often measured by the size of one's sword or the height of one's walls, these gardeners proved that true strength could lie in a well-placed vine, a carefully scattered thorn, or a sundial's fleeting shadow. They transformed the mundane into the miraculous, turning every leaf and pebble into potential allies. What's truly remarkable is how their innovations blurred the line between nature and technology. Unlike blacksmiths forging swords or masons stacking stone, gardeners worked with living, growing things, elements that changed with the seasons, adapted to their environment, and healed when damaged. Their tools weren't static, they evolved alongside the gardens they tended. A trellis one day could be a spike trap the next. A birdhouse might amplify whispers in spring and store supplies by winter. This flexibility made their methods endlessly adaptable, their secrets impossible to fully catalog. Even today, historians uncover new layers to their craft, like decoding a cipher that keeps rewriting itself. The psychological depth of their work is equally fascinating. These gardeners understood human nature as intimately as they understood soil pH. They knew that invaders would overlook a limping laborer's walking stick, that nobles wouldn't suspect the roses of carrying poison, and that even the most paranoid spy would dismiss the wind's direction as a coincidence. Their tools exploited cognitive blind spots, the universal tendency to underestimate the humble, to trust the familiar, to assume nature is passive. In doing so, they crafted a form of warfare that was as much about perception as it was about physical harm. A well-placed rotting fruit grenade didn't just wound, it demoralized, turning the very act of breathing into a calculated risk. Their legacy challenges modern assumptions about innovation and resourcefulness. We often equate advancement with complexity, more gears, more wires, more code. But the gardener's greatest inventions were elegantly simple. A hollowed-out watering can, a gravel path that sang when stepped on, a compass hidden in plain sight. They remind us that brilliance isn't about having the most resources. It's about seeing the potential in what others ignore. In an age of satellites and drones, there's still something to learn from a world where intelligence could be plucked like an herb and danger bloomed as quietly as a night-blooming cereus. So, which of these tools stunned you the most? Was it the poison-tipped pruning shears, so harmless-looking, so deadly in practice? Or perhaps the Beehive Barricades, turning nature's pollinators into living weapons? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed this deep dive into history's most ingenious covert ops, hit that subscribe button for more stories where the past isn't just about dates and battles, but about the unseen hands that shaped them. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary secrets aren't buried in vaults or locked behind doors. They're right there in the garden, waiting for anyone sharp enough to dig a little deeper.